Northeastern Ontario, everything you wanted to know. Come on over. Dieter Buse is here with us, and we're talking about this particular... Now, this is my dog-eared copy, Dieter.
That's good. It means you've been using it.
I've read it, and I must admit, it took me, because I read before going to sleep at night. Not that your book put me to sleep necessarily.
I was just going to say.
But really, this is something that should be in every classroom.
We're hoping to get it into schools and libraries. The libraries have been very good. Yeah. They've been purchasing it. Do you want to know a little bit about how this book came to exist?
Well, of course. Now, I just want to mention, first of all, that I've lived in Timmins, I've lived in North Bay, of course, here in Sudbury. I've traveled throughout the north. But I learned more from your book in probably the last month than I've ever learned through living in these communities. This is a marvelous book. Now, how did it happen?
Well, thank you for the compliment. And I'll tell you a little bit of the background. The Department of History was going to create an encyclopedia of Northeastern Ontario.
Yeah, because we got to mention that you were a history professor at Laurentian University for many years.
I started in 1969, and I retired from marking and meetings in 2005. I never retired from research and writing.
And you've done other books besides this one, of course. We should hold these up here. These before we get into Come On Over.
This is the second volume, and this is the first volume of the books about the military past of Northeastern Ontario.
Yeah, which is quite memorable, really.
Well, when you think of the fact that we did a book that covers all of Northeastern Ontario, this one, which first appeared in 2011, and in 2012, it won the prize for Best Nonfiction about Northern Ontario.
That's right. And this is the second edition.
This is the second edition. But how did the first edition come to exist? Well, the Department of History was collecting information for an encyclopedia of all of Northeastern Ontario. We put together with students, a lot of graduate students working on it, 7 volumes, big binders, that was about this big. And we had everything on politicians, rivers, parks, cities, towns. In other words, it was going to be a compendium and be comprehensive.
That's an incredible amount of information.
Well, it sat there for about 4 years, and no one wanted to touch it because in order to reduce it, to make it a manageable collection of information, it would have required a lot of thinking and input and reorganization. So nobody did anything. Then my colleague, with whom I did these books, Graham Mount, he and I went to Barbados. And this sounds crazy, but we're in Barbados, and he's doing genealogical studies. I was doing what I jokingly call my sand studies by spending time on the beaches. Anyway, we met a person who had the same name as Graham's wife. And this Dr. Fraser went to a dinner with us. And he said, when I was up in Northeastern Ontario, in Northern Ontario, Thunder Bay and Sudbury, he said, I was helping to write the curriculum for the Northern School of Medicine. Okay. And he said, before I went, I tried to inform myself, and I could find nothing. So he said, you boys, to us, being younger than he was at that time, he said, you guys should take that collection and make what I did about Barbados. He had written a book called Barbados, A to Z. And so Graham and I decided, okay, we would go back to the department, collect that material, use that material, reduce the material that's on the politicians and on the cultural side, which we didn't have that much precise information on, and that we would do this compendium to show what our region is like and why it's special.
Well, that's a huge job to take all that information and boil it down to something that's how many pages exactly? Is it the same as the first edition?
No, the first edition is slightly less. And that's because some older people have greater ease of reading the new edition because it has larger print.
A bigger font, huh? Well, it's about 250 pages.
Yes.
Right.
The other aspect of what we did that was special when we did the first edition is we talked to the CBC in Sudbury, and so we did 21 sessions in a special way with Marcus Fabi on Morning North. So we would come in the morning, and we would have a little statement or preparation about, let's say, Timmins. And we would talk about the Heart of Gold, we would talk about Cheyenne Twain, we would talk about some aspect of Timmins. Then we would ask the audience to send us stories that we weren't telling about their town,
Okay.
about Gogama, about Sault Ste. Marie, about
Right.
Sudbury.
Yeah.
We received great stories, some of which made it to the book, some didn't. But after 21 sessions, putting out our information, we received stories. For example, did you know that there was a lumber mill, and the person who was the manager, when a fire was approaching, and the Northeast has many fires.
Many fires, and
What he did is he took the men from his lumber mill and sent them to his house. Why did he send them to his house?
You want to save the house?
No, he said, go to my house, take the piano, go outside, dig a big hole, cover the piano in cardboard, and then put sand over it. Save the piano. And you know why the piano had to be saved? Because the piano was the TV, the color TV of that,
That's right.
that era.
Yes. A lot of people, especially women, learned how to play as well at that particular time. Yeah.
And another kind of a story that we received was a woman who was from upper class, New York, well educated. Her husband became a mining engineer at Wawa, at the iron mine there. And she didn't understand that the whole area around the mine and the town site was all barren of trees. And she learned later, after the first great fire that she experienced in 1911, she said, "Now I understand. You have no trees around means you have a big fire break."
Yeah, that's right. We should have more of that now.
And we need to go back and learn from that.
Well, I know that I'm from Southern Ontario. I've lived across the country. But, there wasn't as much history in Southern Ontario. I'm from Oakville, and I know some of the history of Oakville. But it doesn't have the same romance as Northeastern Ontario somehow. And my first job was in Timmins. And I came to Timmins in, I guess it would be 1959. And I stayed at the Empire Hotel. And at that time, some of the old prospectors would come in. And you'd hear these stories. And I thought, this is fascinating stuff. But, none of it was really, I guess, recorded or written down or chronicled, up until fairly recently.
That's right.
And, and a lot of these stories are in here. And some of the other stories. I lived in Timmins. I was working up there, and they said, okay, if you don't perform well here, we're going to send you to Kirkland Lake. and I've been to Kirkland Lake.
And if you don't perform well there, they're going to send you to Swastika.
Yeah. But I mean, all these communities up here, they all have so much rich history to them, and the commerce that developed, and of course the individual human stories as well too, because it wasn't always as peaceful as you might imagine.
Well, one of those examples that you just speak about is the history of the individual small prospector. Mm-hmm. Do you know that only a year ago, a woman came to me. We were walking the boardwalk and met Lynn Gaynor of the Genealogical Society, and with her was Susie Burton. And Susie Burton said, "I have this collection of material from Archie Burton, who was a prospector, and then he became a businessman." And she said, "Would you like to look at it?" And I said, "Of course." And the kind of story that he represents, he went broke, then he had a separate drilling system by which he made some money so he could keep doing the prospecting that he wanted to do. We don't have that written down very well. No. And we have few of those stories in here, but that's what graduate students at Laurentian should be doing.
Well, sort of the exploration, and I know some of the information here, like William Bell, who had many interests as well. Yep. And I learned here in the book that Skeed was named after his wife, Catherine Skeed Bell, right?
Right.
And I mean, I've been here for how many years now? Since 1960, and these are tidbits of information that are fascinating.
Well, if we speak also of Sudbury, we have a section in our book that talks about the regreening, and in some ways, some of the real pioneers didn't come from Sudbury. No. They were from Southern Ontario. They were scientists who were interested in the pollution problem, because long ago, or not so long ago, many people in Sudbury didn't care much about pollution because they thought that was the collateral damage of having industry here. Yeah.
Dieter, if this book were to be used in the classroom, how would teachers best use it for their students?
Well, there would be many possibilities in terms of using the information that's there or making people aware of where they live. But one way is a teacher could assign one small town to each of the students in the class and have them discover what is special about that place and then report to indicate to the other students, here's what I discovered about, say, cobalt at the silver mines that had its own stock exchange at one time, an opera, places like Timmins and South Porcupine, that there was, every place like that is called a camp because it had a mining camp originally.
Yep.
Or the Sault Ste. Marie had the first electric operated gates in a canal in the world. In other words, we could do it for what's first and explain what's first. Even that we had the first mayor that's of black color in Northeastern Ontario at Mattawa, that we had the first female in Canada as a mayor. That's Webward.
And of course, the first Chinese mayor here in Sudbury.
Yes.
That's Peter
yeah.
Wong. So, you know, so much is in here that it's hard to pick something that is, I would say, was the most interesting. But I think that place names sort of come to my mind. When you look at the Timmins brothers, who actually they didn't start off in Timmins.
No.
No.
Or that we have places named after politicians, Cochrane, Hearst.
That's right.
And that we had in this area many planned communities. Kapuskasing,
Which is laid out as
Iroquois
that's
Falls,
right. Yeah.
there were no Iroquois, and Espanola, Elliott Lake. These are all company towns at one time, like Copper Cliff, and planned by the companies that ran the town.
Lively is another good example. Creighton Mine.
Creighton Mine. Frood, that only existed for a short time, very small community, but it was also planned with streets and so on.
Now, the romance of Northeastern Ontario. You know, this is something that.
Well, I think when people say that, you know what I think of? Our landscape here is special.
Yeah.
Why did we become the iconic place of Canada with the Group of Seven? I want to tell you a story. I'm in the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto,
Right.
and I go in the Group of Seven area, and all of these 12 and 13-year-olds are sitting on the floor imitating pictures of the Group of Seven. And it's, what are they doing? They're drawing Algoma County, or Algoma Country.
Yeah.
So I stopped the group. The teacher was there. I'd asked the teacher if I could do this. I said, do you know where Algoma is? And you know what? Not one student knew where Algoma was.
Well, this is something, you know, we don't celebrate, and we don't have the ability to appreciate the uniqueness of Northeastern Ontario. No, as I mentioned, I come from Southern Ontario, flat generally, pretty uninteresting really, but that was my original home. But now, of course, I call my home the North, and you come north, and as soon as you get past, well,
Parry Sound,
really, you know, then you feel
rocks, lakes, and trees.
Yeah, really, and then this is what makes the area very unique, and why, of course, we have so many cottagers and people from down south who want to come up here and experience that uniqueness.
And I want to tell another little story. A fellow whose writings, a journalist and a good investigator, Roy McGregor, he wrote a book which made me think differently about him because I really respected him. He wrote a book called The Rivers of Canada as Highways. Okay? St. Lawrence, obvious, right?
Yeah.
But do you know that there's one in Northeastern Ontario, the French River, which served as the main highway for people to get to Western Canada, for the military to get there to put down the rebellion. It was the passageway. And if Sault Ste. Marie in the War of 1812 hadn't been defended and kept, that passageway would have been closed.
That's right.
So how can you not talk about the river that is one of the most crucial to Canadian history in terms of every explorer, from Mackenzie going back to Champlain, went that route.
The
French River, the Trout Lake, La Visage, Portage. And that gets me to another aspect what I rant about, John. You know what that is? We don't have enough National Historic Sites with interpretive centers.
No.
We have 4 of them in Northeastern Ontario. And we need to have a lot more. I've argued for Algoma Mills to become one. I've argued for the Vase Portage to become one. I've argued for the Cape Railway Museum to become one.
It's not?
And it's not. It is a
well,
locally supported one. The feds put in no money.
No, it's really the gem in our area. But going back, steamships, of course, were something
Yeah,
that
they were normal.
I mean, that was the way people traveled around, and sometimes they met a watery end.
Yeah, and it wasn't just on the Great Lakes. Lake Huron, of course, serving Manitoulin Island from Owen Sound, but on Lake Temiskaming, that was steamships that ran up and down. In the mines, we think in terms of the mines of the Timmins area being developed because of railways, but at first they were actually served by a different route, by the river and the steamships on the lakes.
A lot of people also don't realize that Sudbury really is a youngster compared to some of the other communities here in the north.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it was only a few years ago that the land records were kept, I think, in North Bay for Sudbury. It's amazing, right?
And then they came here, and then they were taken to Toronto, where we've had to fight the Sudbury genealogists, fought to get them back.
Well, we were considered to be sort of the resources that kept Southern Ontario prosperous.
Especially Cobalt, Sudbury, Timmins, those camps. We produced minerals, but we also produced forest products. And that's an industry that has not had enough defense, I think, in the last while.
Well, I was just out my son's camp and looking at some of I was being driven out, so I had a chance to look out the window at some of the growth. So that was all forested. That was all cut down years ago. So what we have now, instead of trees that were this big, we now have trees that are about this size.
Well, they're coming back.
They are coming back, but all that was a huge industry.
Yes. In 1911, I have pictures of whitefish just southwest of Sudbury.
Right.
And that's where there was a lumber camp, and they were taking down trees the width of your table.
Yeah.
And if you go out there now, John, and there's discussions about it, the trees are only about half that size, but they're talking about the next cut.
Ooh.
And Cookagami Lake, same thing, that there have been attempts to cut again.
Well, the sawmills, of course, were everywhere, even one on Mineral Lake, and every year the slabs keep coming up out of because that particular time, of course, they just slabbed it. They sawdust one in the lake or wherever it happened to be, and
Boomtown, Blind River.
And of course, the railway came through 1883.
1883 here.
Yeah.
Blind River, the largest lumber mill east of the Rockies was at Blind River. I have a picture which shows almost a mile of stacked lumber.
Wow. What came to mind in this book that was most unique for you when you were doing the research and study? Then, something that said, "Wow, this is something I never would have thought of."
Well, we had a lot of wows. One of them was about actually it wasn't for this book, but it was when we were in White River and the question of the bear that became Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
And it became a question of whether that was the bear or whether it was the bear that went with the 159th Battalion that came from Timmins, and they also had a moose. And the moose didn't survive the voyage over the Atlantic, but the bear did. And the story is the same. The bear was given to the London Zoo. They couldn't get rid of it. They wanted it. So the result is, which bear at the London Zoo became Winnie the Pooh? The one from White River or the one from Timmins?
Well, I guess we'll never find out.
No.
And then, of course, we have the goose.
A big metal goose that was actually a wooden goose originally. Yeah. It was made out of wood and painted. Then it became a metal goose, and now there's a new one. Yeah. And I understand some of the parts of the new goose actually are porcelain.
Really?
A porcelain finish.
Of course, Wawa is a spot where a lot of us who travel through to Thunder Bay, that's a stopover spot.
Yep.
In Wawa. And a lot of people don't realize, from away, the vast distances we have here.
We are Northeastern Ontario is almost the size of Germany.
Yeah.
So, and we have 500,000 people in that area, the same as Newfoundland, roughly.
We could have been our own province.
Well, I think I would correct you, John. I'd say we should have been our own
We should have been our
province.
own province.
But I think the political landscape wasn't going to allow that. But we were considered to be New Ontario.
Yep.
Even at the time of the First World War, when they had recruiting posters, they were about recruits in New Ontario. The territory north of the French River and Parry Sound was called New Ontario.
Well, a lot of people have very little knowledge of New Ontario, and being a Southern Ontario boy, of course, and coming up here. And I must admit that most of those I went to school with are still down there. So Northern Ontario is still an area that's remote for most people.
It's remote and problematic in my view because even though Sudbury, for example, has been drastically changed, and even other mining communities now have been regenerated and the mines are backfilled to a great extent. There's still some bad ones. But in the rest of the world, when I travel, say I'm from Sudbury, people still, oh, that place,
Yeah.
armpit of the world.
Yeah, that's right.
They do not have an understanding of what changes have occurred. I mean, I argue with my colleagues about how those changes occurred, but the issue is it is changed. And that applies to all the mining centers. You said cobalt, and I think of cobalt and how the silver trail is slowly growing over. We have to do some work to keep it up.
Well, you do mention in the revised edition here, you include a lot of up-to-date information, including population figures.
Yes, we tried to use the 2021 census, and in some cases we have as recent as 2023 information. So we updated that. We updated some of the changes that I mentioned before about centers that have closed. Not just, the Harry Oaks Chateau, the Sir Harry Oaks Chateau in Kirkland Lake, that museum is going to close. How the building is going to be used is still up for discussion.
This is unfortunate because we don't want to lose our history.
No.
And you've done a great job in preserving our history here. In the couple of minutes we have remaining here, because we could go on for hours, how do you get this book now? I mean, you want to make sure that it goes into libraries, of course.
That book, as well as these volumes about the military history of the area, are available through the publisher, Latitude 46 in Sudbury. And she also provides delivery, free delivery in Sudbury. You can go to Books and Beans, which is a little cafe downtown. You could go to the Art Gallery of Sudbury, which is now located temporarily downtown.
That's right.
They sell the book, but of course the main sale is Chapters or Indigo, and that's on just off the Kingsway in Sudbury. The other chapters in North Bay and Sault Ste. Marie are supposed to be carrying it, but I haven't been there to check.
So just one final question. Why the title Come On Over? Because I thought it might have been more appropriate to say Come On Up.
Well, that's interesting because you could also say come on down because Hudson's Bay and James Bay were the what's now called Moose Factory was established well before Southern Ontario. And the view of Ontario originally was from the north down. So you could go up, but we did come on over because
I've heard people use that expression, come on down, really.
Cheyenne Twain's best-selling 40 million copies, and we thought it just was appropriate.
So whether it's come on over, come on down, come on whatever, go get it. This is the book that not only for yourself, regardless of how long, if you're a native Northeasterner, or if you've just arrived on the scene or been here for several years like myself, you can learn a lot from this book. I'm sounding like a commercial, aren't I?
I like it, John.
but it is true because really this is who we are, this is where we are, this is how we live, and how we've lived over, well, quite
150 years.
Yeah, so it's all there.
In a different perspective from the indigenous perspective, 10,000 years.
Yeah, yes, because they've gone way, way back, and now we're really beginning to appreciate their history and their contributions as well, because that was so covered up for so many, many, many years. But it's a new age, a new look. So come on over. Thanks, Dieter.
Okay.